Jason's back with us at the table, but Kevin, just back to what we were just talking about, maybe something to take. What are you most proud of the work that you guys accomplished? What do you, if ever, you know, if good, well-intentioned, well-informed citizens, there are a lot of them who won't have time to read this entire report. What would you hope that they know from what you guys did?
Well, specifically, things that were brought forward in Senate Bill 5. For years, and some people were surprised, we have been very opposed to ticket quota systems. We've known it's been a problem. I'm glad that that's finally going to come to fruition to put a stop to that. The aim towards officer wellness, which was part of the training, which I think is huge because we have been woefully inadequate in looking at our police officers' mental and physical wellness, and quite frankly, that's what really affects how they do their job. So I think that's really an important piece, and I think we've been behind the ball on that, and I think that's going to be huge.
Yeah, that one doesn't seem to have gotten as much publicity, but I've heard that talked about in a lot of the meetings, that wellness component of the officer.
When an officer doesn't feel right when he's doing the job, that's going to affect how he interacts with the public. So I think that's a trickle-down effect that's going to be really important.
Is that something that was embraced by a large number of the commissioners, or was that something that seemed to be a priority?
Yeah, I think the law enforcement and the community and law enforcement work group, especially after everything happened, was probably the work group that everyone was looking at. This was the first priority that Ferguson and the residents said, we want this to be the first issue. And, you know, thank God with the co-chairs and all the members, including Kevin and Brittany, who served on the presidential or the president task force, that was able to take some of those and the knowledge that they had, Dan Isom, to really look into some issues that we never really thought about, like officer wellness. If they're not out there well, and if they're not, you know, mentally well or physically well, they're not going to do their job well. And that's for anybody, but officers, we need to make sure they are taken care of because they have such a huge role, you know, protecting and serving the community.
Jason, I think it's fair to say there's been a fair amount of criticism that the report as a whole is just too broad. Is that something you've heard?
I think that I've heard a lot of different lines of criticism. One is just that commissions like this historically haven't worked, which, as I alluded to before, was, I think the commissioners were cognizant of that. I think that some of the proposals are clearly going to run into political opposition. Even bringing in the Attorney General as the person to look into police-involved shootings, I mean, that is not going to be a universally popular thing in the legislature or among prosecutors. But I think some of I think broadness, while that might have been another criticism, I think, as I said before, there are some things within that report that can be implemented without a governmental entity being the deciding factor. And I think if people are really motivated to change the landscape of St. Louis's educational, healthcare, and economic development landscape, they're going to look at these recommendations and they're going to put the energy and try and do that internally in those places that I mentioned.
So was that something you guys were thinking of, about whether or not an idea was doable before you put it on the piece of paper or put it in the digital file?
Well, the governor charged us with making unflinching recommendations, and that's what we did. And I think a good thing about being broad is that when people say, hey, well, what can I do? There's so many things. Well, pick one or two and figure out what organization is going to do those one or two action items and work with them. So there's plenty of opportunity there for people to pick out what they think they want to work on, and I think being broad is good.
Do you think, Jason talked about motivation, do you think half the population may not feel like they have much motivation? They might be ready to wash their hands of this.
Well, and you know what? It's not the commission's role to see this goes forward, because people are going to say, what are you going to do? Our answer is no, what are you going to do to make sure our region gets better by working on this?
And I said this before at a forum at St. Louis Public Radio, but I'll say it again because I think it's important. I have a 20-month-old son, and we plan to stay in St. Louis, my wife and I, for the foreseeable future. The question that I have to ask every night is this the particular community right now that I want him to be in 20 or 15 or 10 years? A community that is segregated, a community that has educational deficiencies, and a community that's divided. And if the answer is yes, then everything that we talked about tonight is still going to be in place in 10, 15, 20 years. But if the answer is no, then I think individual people are going to be incentivized to work within their spheres of influence and try to make this community better. It's going to be people, it's going to be policymakers, it's going to be organizations, and the incentive, I think, is for the next generation.
Are you okay with the time it might take to get this done? I've heard people say things like, if you got a good idea, and let's say it does require the legislature, be prepared for a 5-year window to get it done.
Mm-hmm. I'm optimistic, but I've been living in Missouri for a while, so I'm starting to see how things work out. And I know it's going to take time. The civil rights movement, we made huge accomplishments, but we still have to continue to fight. I think even, you know, when people look at, like you say, is it too broad? It's so many issues that we need to start addressing. It's not just law enforcement, it's not just education, it's not just health, it is all these issues, and we can't just solely say we're just going to, you know, pioneer this law enforcement agenda. We have to really look at all these issues and look how they intertwine and how they intersect and how they are really continuing to hurt our region as a whole. Until we address them all, we won't get nowhere, and I know it's going to take time. I know this is going to be a generational thing, but we can't go to sleep, we can't give up. We all have a role in this somehow. I'm not saying be a protester, I'm not saying be on a commission, but you have a role in making change. So like you said, you don't have to have your children continue to live the same lifestyle that you lived.
Do we have the leadership in place to do the things you're talking about?
Definitely, definitely. The young people give me hope. And I think it's a lot of community members as well that see that we really need this change. Community, labor, faith. A lot of people in this region, I think, is ready to take on this charge. Even though it's going to be difficult, we don't know the pathway. We gave a path, but I think people are ready. They're ready for change.
We just have a few seconds left, but I'm curious, how will you measure, how will you know when what you all did was a success?
Rasheen will probably still be around. I don't know if I will or not, but it's going to take time. We've already seen success. We'll see how Senate Bill 5 works out. Accreditation for police departments is going to be huge. We'll see how that works out.
All right, we'll leave it there, even though I know we'll be talking about this some more. Thank you all for your time. Rasheen, Kevin, Jason, we appreciate it, and thank you as well. Until next time, stay tuned.